All right, guys, so if you've been dealing with some elbow pain whenever we work our pull-up or our chin-up variations, I got a video here for you today to help work on fixing and mitigating those symptoms for you. A big reason that the pull-up variation tends to bring out these symptoms of elbow pain, oftentimes called golfer's elbow, is pull-ups are one of the hardest things you can do with the upper body. So it's very common when we start working those positions in a fitness class or with a strength routine that we tend to just overload that position beyond our capabilities. What we're typically feeling is symptoms of tendinosis or even tendinitis in that medial side of the elbow, which is where our flexor group lives. And what we want to work on first is finding regressions for the movement so that we can still work it without aggravating our symptoms. A common mistake I see people make when we get those elbow pain symptoms is we entirely rest the position and wait for the symptoms to alleviate, which generally they do. But the problem then becomes when we go back to reload the position and work our pull-up variations again, because we haven't been training the movement for a little bit, we commonly overload it again, which will bring back those symptoms. If we do that a couple of times, we just start to come to the belief that pull-ups are going to damage my elbow and there's really nothing I can do about it. What I'm here to tell you today is you can work on fixing and alleviating those symptoms so that you can get to a point where you can work pull-ups pain-free. So breaking down the issue with entirely resting a joint, the problem becomes if we have some swelling or some inflammation in that joint capsule or the tissues surrounding it, if we immobilize or don't work that tissue or that elbow joint enough, what happens is that fluid is just going to continue to build up. What happens when we work our joints to full ranges of motion is we're getting to use our body's lymphatic system, which is kind of like the sewer system for the body. So all of that waste product that's happening from that injured or overworked area gets to drain out of the body the more we move those joints around. A problem a lot of people face when we're trying to move our joints through full ranges of motion is we typically don't see those full ranges of motion the way that we should be able to express. What that means is sometimes I can't get my elbow all the way straight because maybe my bicep's a little bit tight, and sometimes I can't get my elbow to flex all of the way because maybe I have some tricep or even some lat tension. This is where mobility would enter the picture. Now, mobility is a term that gets thrown around a whole lot nowadays. What I'm talking about when I say mobility is oftentimes soft tissue work, which can look a lot of different ways. A lot of different methods are successful with this. What I show people is self-myofascial release, which is using foam rollers or lacrosse balls to help massage out those tissues on your own. We also use compression a lot of times, and I've also had people use body work as well, all in the name of trying to help alleviate some symptoms at some tissues, then work on the movement that's giving us issues. Doing mobility in isolation without then working on the problem movement is only doing a half job for your joints and for your system. We always want to be trying to work back towards doing a full variation of whatever movement that is. When I have people with knee pain, we are always trying to work on full range of motion squats and lunges, and the same goes for the pull-up variation. We want to work on being able to hold a full hang position as well as get to as high up as we can on that bar. This is where we start to have a relationship between mobilizations and regressions. The regression sometimes can be pulling an external load so that we can disconnect our body moving and the bar staying still, and we get to work on activating our muscles properly with an external moving load rather than us being the load that we have to move. And so as I use mobilizations to get better ranges of motion and better strength, then I can work on moving my regressions up to a little bit of a more challenging variation. As I have problem areas, I can solve them with those mobility drills. Mobility is serving the purpose of allowing you to feel a little bit better so that you can then express that movement that you're trying to express. Where a lot of people go halfway with mobility is that will oftentimes alleviate the symptoms. So if I roll through either my tricep and lat or my flexor group on my forearm, and then all of a sudden my elbow feels a lot better, I go along my day and I continue to skip out on working my pull-up or my pressing variations, then I'm still left with a joint that no longer feels bad, but it also doesn't have a lot of confidence or a lot of strength or resiliency to be able to be loaded in that flexed or extended position. Common when that happens to see some form breakdown. Let's say we're doing big sets of 8, and that last rep, I'm flinching and I'm reaching as hard as I can to try and get my chin above that bar. Your shoulder mechanics oftentimes fall apart which is a very common issue. Again, this isn't to get to the point where all of our reps look entirely perfect, but if we're doing a bunch of reps that all look a little bit iffy, it's very common that we're just putting a little bit too much undue stress onto joints that aren't necessarily built to handle it. The solution to this problem is all about finding the variation that fits where your skill level is. Where I see people go wrong is when we're working the variation, even though it's an easier form of the pull-up than the full dead hang, we still oftentimes see that people are not expressing that full range of motion. Again, that could be due to tissue restrictions, like I talked about with mobility, or it could just be that we're not knowledgeable in where that range of motion should be going. One of the first strategies I like using with people is just doing some simple compression. Now, what this is called is a flossing band. And what it's going to do is, once I tie this up, we're just simply adding some compression to the joint. Oftentimes what happens when we get some compression in there is, like I mentioned earlier when we talked about lymphatic drainage, is sometimes when a joint hasn't moved in a while or it hasn't expressed that full range of motion, sometimes the fluid or the tissues in there can just get a little bit bound up and a little bit dried out because they're not getting that full range of motion, so they're not able to drain effectively. So we're getting some compression, which is gonna just squeeze everything out of that joint, especially once I start to add some movement in here, trying to keep a pretty good poker face. But what this band is also doing is, much like a foam roller, we're getting that compressed tissue right on top of our elbow. So for me personally, I can feel that my extensor group on the top of the elbow is a little bit restricted because that band is grabbing a hold of everything. So as I try to either move my wrist around or move my elbow around, that is getting all of those tissues captured and just massaging them out, much like we do in body work or foam rolling or self-myofascial work, to alleviate those symptoms. What this band is also great for is just getting everything to slide past one another a little bit easier. Within our body, obviously we have a bunch of different tissues happening, especially in our lower arm and our lower legs. We have a lot of tissue jam-packed in there. And in order for everything to function properly, we need everything to be able to slide past one another. If you look at the skin on the back of your hand, that should be able to move around pretty easily. And sometimes within the body, we can get these adhesions where things get stuck together. Slapping a band on and moving that joint around a lot of times improves that sliding surface function. One of my favorite things about using compression and these flossing bands is we can work the exact movements that are giving us issues. So say we're hanging out in the bottom position of a hang and that's where our elbow pain presents. We can throw a band on and then we can gently work on opening up this position. And now that the band is on, what I wasn't feeling before is this really big bicep stretch that I'm feeling really strong now. And the band is helping me address this tissue restriction in the exact position that we're working on opening up. Now, the last thing that the band is going to help with is, now that I've had it on for a couple minutes, what we're gonna do is take this band off. As you can see, it did cut off some circulation temporarily, which is perfectly fine. But now that the band is off, that blood is gonna fully rush back into that arm. It's gonna perfuse all of those tissues with lots of fresh blood, which is exactly what that joint capsule and all of those tissues in the elbow or that joint need in order to fully function and get back to a normal state. When it comes to self-myofascial release for the golfer's elbow, one of the best things, or the first things we like to start with, is just approaching this flexor group and trying to find any adhesions that we can and try to work them out. One of the best setups for this is using a countertop or a table or a bench that we can place a lacrosse ball or a baseball, or if you have a specific mobility tool, that works great as well. And what we're gonna be going after, if our palm is facing up, is all of these tissues on the inside of the elbow, right near where we're getting those symptoms of pain. Now, when we're foam rolling, especially using something a little bit harder, we want to try to avoid bony structures. And we are near the elbow, which does have some bony structures in it. So make sure that when you're doing this technique, that you're not pushing into those bony structures or anything that feels way too uncomfortable. There are some nerves that are close to the surface as well. Use your judgment and make sure that you're feeling discomfort, but not to the point of extreme pain or anything wild like that. What we're gonna do is placing that ball on the table, I'm gonna lay my arm over top of that ball, and I'm just gonna apply some pressure down, either by leaning into that arm, or I can place a hand on top, which makes it a lot easier to apply that pressure down. Now, what I wanna do in the beginning is I can search pretty much the bottom or top half, rather, of my forearm and just search around for spots that give you a little bit of that pain response of like, ooh, it feels like a little bit of a restriction in there. As we search around, when we find a particular hot spot that we roll over, and every time we're kind of getting that pain response, I want to get that ball right on that spot. And then once I do, I can have my hand just rotate side to side in the beginning. With any foam rolling technique, it's important that we try to stay relaxed as much as possible. So I don't really want to dig into this arm super aggressively to the point that my body starts bracing and trying to resist what this ball is trying to do. I do want to get to a point where I'm starting to feel slight discomfort, but nothing so crazy that I'm starting to wince and not be able to breathe effectively. It's more important that you stay relaxed and try to move the joint around rather than really aggressively dig into any knots or any adhesions that you may find in here. Generally speaking, we want to spend around 2 minutes working this tissue. And as we work those hot spots, after about a minute or 2 minutes, we will find that those spots generally start to open up a little bit. And then afterwards, we can move that joint around. And like I've explained, get back to our variations that were causing those issues in the first place. Next area worth exploring when it comes to self-myofascial release is going to be our big lat muscles, which are the main movers when it comes to our pull-ups. Commonly, with most people that I've worked with, a lot of us tend to be very, very tight in that lat muscle, which restricts our ability to get our arms in the overhead position, which is going to make it really hard to keep good technique as we work our pull-up variations. This mobilization is best used with a foam roller or with a larger ball, but what we want to do is lay on our side. We can start with the side that does have those symptoms of elbow pain, but I highly suggest working this on both sides just to make sure we don't start getting elbow pain on the other side. What I want to do is placing this roller right near my armpit, but just a little bit lower than that armpit. And our lat muscle is on the back side of our body for the most part, but to make sure that we're capturing that muscle, I want to start just in front of it, and then what we're going to do with the roller is gradually move it back towards the back side of our body. So again, getting that roller right under the armpit area, and then I can start applying pressure or really just relaxing into the floor. You may feel some discomfort immediately, much like I had demonstrated when rolling through the flexor group. We want to make sure we're feeling that discomfort, but it's not to the point of extreme pain or where my body is wincing or anything crazy like that. The tool that you're using to mobilize is very important. The one I have here is a little bit in the middle of the road as far as aggression. There's something that's a little bit more aggressive and there's something that's a lot softer. We always want to try and find the tool that works for the amount of restriction that we have. Typically, the more muscle bound you are, the more aggressive the tool you'll need. If you don't have that much muscle, you don't really need a super aggressive tool. As I'm rolling here, I want to try and explore getting into the back side of that shoulder, right around the shoulder blade muscle, and you'll feel, or the shoulder blade bone, we'll feel a lot of restrictions in this lat as we try to roll towards that back side. If you're feeling the way you could just hear it in my voice, where I'm starting to get those restrictions and I'm starting to want to tighten up, I would highly suggest stop trying to speak at full volume and just trying to breathe through and relax as much as possible. But it's not about me today, it's about you. Remember, once we work that 2 to 3 minutes each side, we want to work back to getting those pull-ups in and cleaning up those technique flaws. Now, 2 of the best mobilizations we can do for our pull-up or our overhead position. First up is our banded lat stretch. What we're going to do is place our hand inside a pretty heavy band. What you're going to do is go with the back of your wrist against the end of the band, and then that allows the band to kind of capture your hand, so you don't have to death grip this and possibly present those symptoms. I can kind of relax my grip just a little bit. What I'm going to do is then walk back, so this band is trying to pull my arm away with a little bit of a distraction force. And then from there, I'm just going to hinge, much like a deadlift, bringing my chest and my face towards the floor. And what I'll feel is a really big stretch on this lat muscle, which I showed you how to roll out in the last clip. And what we're doing here is we're basically allowed to work this overhead position that we hit whenever we're in the bottom of a pull-up. If we tend to get into a little bit more of an earmuff position, what this band is gonna help us do is open up this lat muscle so that when we're in that hang position, we can get our shoulders down and back, which is the perfect place we want them in for the bottom initiation of that pull-up. Once we work this mobilization for a couple minutes aside, the next one we can work, we're gonna place that elbow inside the band so the band is just above that elbow joint. Before I turn around, I'm gonna grab a hold of that band and then I'll face away from that band. What I'm doing now is working pretty much that same overhead position, but instead of my arm being straight up like it was with the banded lat stretch, now I have my elbow bent, which is going to help get into the tricep and lat. And also I can rotate in towards that arm to work my rotator cuff muscles, which are also most likely restricted in that overhead position. The more we work with these bands and the foam rollers to help open up that bottom position, the stronger we're gonna feel coming from that bottom position and trying to pull ourselves up to the top. All right, guys, I hope those tips helped alleviate some of those symptoms of that elbow pain that you've been getting. Thank you very much for watching. I do plan on making more content like this in the future when it comes to knee pain with squats and lunges. If that sounds like something you're interested in, keep your eyes peeled. Hope to see you soon.